December 8th, 2000. Dublin, Ireland. After spending a rainy evening at a staff Christmas party, 22-year-old Trevor Deely walks to his place of employment, the Bank of Ireland Asset Management Headquarters. Trevor chats with a coworker and grabs an umbrella, but after leaving the building and passing by a nearby ATM, he vanishes without a trace. CCTV footage would show a man in black coming into contact with Trevor that night, but this man is never identified, and no one knows if he had any connection with Trevor's disappearance. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today we will be traveling across the Atlantic to cover our podcast's very first case from Ireland, the 2000 disappearance of Trevor Deely. This case was originally suggested in our Facebook discussion group by an Irish listener named Sam, and a couple of other Irish listeners in the group chimed in and said they'd love to see it on the show. It's one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in the history of Ireland, and it doesn't look like any other podcasts have covered it, so I'm happy to oblige. The case has also gotten a lot of coverage in the Irish media these past several months, since investigators received a promising lead about finding Trevor's remains, but unfortunately, they've come up empty. This is one of those chilling missing persons cases where the victim was last seen on some surveillance footage before they seemingly vanished into thin air, and there are things about this footage which open up unanswered questions about what might have happened. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which is currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold also has its own PayPal account and a donate button on the website. If there's anyone out there who wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out on a future episode. So with all that out of the way, let us now delve into the unsolved disappearance of Trevor Deely. Our story begins in Ireland in 2000. Our central figure is 22-year-old Trevor Deely, who originally hails from the town of Naas and is very close with his parents and three siblings. Trevor now lives in Dublin, sharing an apartment with two female flatmates, and is employed at the headquarters of the Bank of Ireland Asset Management, more commonly known as BIAM. Trevor works for their IT department, and by all accounts, he is considered a model employee with a strong work ethic and is well liked by everyone who knows him. In November of that year, Trevor went on vacation by traveling to Alaska for several weeks. One of Trevor's primary reasons for selecting Alaska as his destination was to visit a girl who lived in Anchorage, as the two of them had previously met during a trip she had taken to Ireland. After returning home from his holiday, Trevor went back to work on December 6th. On the evening of Thursday, December 7th, Trevor attended a staff Christmas party which involved traveling to multiple locations with his co-workers. They started off with drinks at a reception in a club called Copperface Jack's, then moved to the Hilton Hotel on Charlemont Place for the main party for the next several hours, before they eventually wound up at a nightclub called Buck Whaley's on Leeson Street, and of course much alcohol was consumed throughout the course of the night. At around 3:25 a.m. on December 8th, Trevor left the nightclub and would ordinarily have walked home to his apartment, but there was a heavy rainstorm going on with very high winds. At this particular time, there was a taxi driver strike in Dublin, and no cabs were available, so Trevor decided to walk to his workplace, the Bank of Ireland Asset Management Headquarters at Wilton Terrace, which was only a couple minutes away. At this time of night, the building's rear gate would have ordinarily been locked and had a chain on it, but the security guard had removed the chain a few minutes earlier in order to receive a delivery, so Trevor was able to unlock the gate and let himself inside. By the time he entered the building, Trevor was completely drenched with rain, but he logged onto his computer to check and send out an email before meeting up with Carl Pender, a coworker who was working the overnight shift. The two of them had coffee and chatted together in the staff canteen. Even though Carl would describe Trevor as being a bit tipsy, he did not believe he was heavily intoxicated. Trevor's main reason for visiting was to borrow one of the corporate golf umbrellas the office kept lying around, which he could carry while completing his walk home in the rain. After grabbing the umbrella, Trevor exited the building at 4:02 a.m. Shortly thereafter, Trevor used his mobile phone to leave a quick voicemail for a friend, but this would turn out to be the last time anyone ever heard from him. Trevor failed to show up for work later that day, which seemed very uncharacteristic of him, but this did not raise any alarm bells, given that it was a Friday and Trevor had been out drinking the night before. However, when Trevor failed to show up for work on Monday, December 11th, this caused great concern. Nobody had made any contact with Trevor over the weekend, and all calls to his cell phone went unanswered. When his family went to visit his apartment, there was no answer at the door. Since Trevor's flatmates were out of town on holiday, it could not be confirmed if he actually made it back to his apartment after leaving BIAM headquarters. Trevor was subsequently reported missing to the Garda, which, in case you're not aware, is the official name of Ireland's police force. This would turn out to be one of the highest profile missing persons cases in the history of Ireland. The Deely family would search for Trevor relentlessly, and thousands of leaflets and missing persons posters were distributed throughout the area. One of the first steps in the investigation involved checking the footage from CCTV cameras located outside BIAM headquarters, which would turn up a very intriguing clue. Starting at 3:05 a.m., the CCTV footage would show an unidentified man dressed in black standing by a pillar next to one of the rear gates, and for reasons unknown, he remained there for nearly half an hour. But then, at 3:34, after this man appeared to be taking a quick call on his cell phone, Trevor arrived and walked past him. At the time, Trevor was talking on his own mobile phone with Carl Pender, so he never acknowledged the man in black, but then the man immediately left his position to follow Trevor. Now there was a separate camera overlooking a second rear gate behind the building, which was 20 feet away from the first gate. 20 seconds after Trevor passed the man in black, the CCTV footage from the second camera would show this man walking ahead of Trevor before he comes to a stop near the second gate, which seemed to indicate that he passed Trevor during that brief window of time. After Trevor finishes his phone call, the two men appear to engage in a brief conversation before Trevor unlocks the gate and walks into the building. According to Carl, Trevor never mentioned anything about his conversation with the man in black during the time they chatted. A few minutes after Trevor went inside, the man walked across the road out of frame and could no longer be seen when Trevor left the building and exited through the gate at 4:02. But this would not be the last official sighting of Trevor. At 4:14, CCTV footage showed Trevor passing by an ATM at a branch of the Bank of Ireland located at the corner of Haddington Road and Bagot Street Bridge. This was approximately a 15-minute walk away from Trevor's apartment in Ballsbridge, but no one knows what happened to him afterward. However, 30 seconds after Trevor disappeared out of frame, the CCTV footage showed a man dressed in black passing by the ATM and heading in the same direction. But since the footage was not very clear, no one could be certain if this was the same man in black seen standing outside BIAM headquarters. Even though a public plea was sent out for this man to come forward, no one ever did. Anyway, the CCTV footage had captured Trevor right after he had crossed Bagot Street Bridge, which overlooks the Grand Canal, so authorities looked into the possibility that Trevor might have fallen off the bridge into the water and drowned. A thorough search was performed of the canal, along with the other waterways connected to it, but it turned up no trace of Trevor's body. According to the head of the Garda's sub-aqua unit which performed the search, it seemed very certain that Trevor would have been found if he had fallen into the canal. And since Trevor had already crossed the bridge the last time he was seen on the CCTV footage, why would he have turned around and gone in the opposite direction? The authorities also searched the River Dodder, another section of water which Trevor would have had to cross on his route back to his apartment, but nothing was found. In fact, the umbrella Trevor was carrying could also not be found, nor were any of his personal items, including his mobile phone. Trevor's sister, Michelle, had called his phone at least 4 times over the weekend after he disappeared. While it started going straight to voicemail on Monday the 11th, Michelle seemed to recall that Trevor's phone did ring when she attempted to reach him over the weekend. Interestingly enough, if Trevor had continued on his route home, it would have required him to walk down Northumberland Road, which is known as the Embassy Belt, since it houses the embassy buildings for the United States, Italy, and the Czech Republic. During his initial search for Trevor on December 11th, his brother Mark spoke to one of the guards standing outside the U.S. Embassy and learned that President Clinton would be visiting the following day. According to the guard, the entire surrounding area was thoroughly inspected over the weekend by the president's advanced security team in order to prepare for his impending visit. This involved searching all existing trash bins and manholes, and nothing was found to suggest foul play had recently occurred there. In other words, if something happened to Trevor on his route home, and his body was hidden anywhere in the surrounding area, the security team definitely would have found it. The problem is that since Trevor had not yet been reported missing at the time the security sweep was performed, they could have destroyed potential evidence without even realizing it. There would be no major developments in the case during the next several years, and it seemed like Trevor had just vanished into thin air. In 2017, a forensic enhancement was done to the CCTV footage of Trevor in hopes of getting a better glimpse of the mysterious man in black standing outside the gates of BIAM headquarters and the man seen walking 30 seconds behind Trevor when he passed by the ATM. Even after the enhancement, they could not conclusively determine if both men were the same person. In spite of this, a €100,000 reward which had been provided by an anonymous donor was being offered for information. Well, in August of last year, the Garda announced that they received a promising new lead and were performing an extensive search of a 3-acre wooded site in the Chapel Lizard area of South Dublin, located approximately 8 kilometers from where Trevor was last seen. An informant had come forward with information alleging that a member of a well-known criminal family from the Crumlin suburb had confessed to him about shooting Trevor before burying his body inside a drain in Chapel Lizard. The story went that Trevor had been beaten and put inside the trunk of a car before he was brought to a house and threatened at gunpoint. Apparently, the person responsible was just trying to scare Trevor and didn't have any intention of killing him, but the gun discharged, and Trevor was shot dead by accident. The suspect was not publicly named, but he had an extensive criminal history in the drug trade, and some of his associates were alleged to be involved in running street prostitution in the Bagot Street area around the time of Trevor's disappearance. It's worth noting that in June of 1998, a 21-year-old sex worker named Sinead Kelly had been stabbed 14 times, and her body was found on the banks of the Grand Canal off Bagot Street, close to where Trevor was last seen. While it's believed Kelly was murdered on the orders of a drug dealer she owed money to, there was never enough evidence to make an arrest, and her murder officially remains unsolved. The informant who came forward with the information about Trevor claimed he was not interested in the €100,000 reward, but just wanted to clear his guilty conscience. The Garda searched and excavated the site in Chapel Lizard for 6 weeks, but failed to turn up any evidence that Trevor had been buried there. But in an odd turn of events, a handgun and a consignment of heroin and cocaine worth over €80,000 was found buried at the site. It's believed that the location had been used as a stash area for criminals, but authorities do not think the gun or the drugs have anything to do with Trevor's case. The Deely family were left devastated by the lack of resolution, and were sad to say that the investigation was now back to square one. After 17 years, there are still no answers about what actually happened to Trevor Deely. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Yes, this is definitely a prime example of the most baffling type of missing persons case imaginable, where there is virtually no evidence to work with. It's easy to see why this has become one of the most famous disappearances in the history of Ireland. If I had to name some North American equivalents of this case, the best examples I could think of are the disappearances of Brian Schaefer and Brandon Swanson, the latter of which was featured on The Trail Went Cold. Much like Trevor's story, both of those cases involved young men who went out for a night of drinking and partying and then just vanished off the face of the earth. What's particularly frustrating here is how differently things could have turned out for Trevor if not for a series of unfortunate circumstances. For instance, if there hadn't been a taxi strike in Dublin, Trevor simply could have taken a cab home that night and arrived safely. If it wasn't for the massive rainstorm, Trevor may not have felt the need to take a detour to his workplace to grab an umbrella. If his two flatmates weren't out of town on holiday at that time, then an entire weekend might not have passed before anyone noticed Trevor was missing. The Deely family are one of the most active families I've ever seen in terms of working to keep their missing loved one's case in the spotlight, and you have to feel immense sympathy for them. In one particularly heartbreaking interview, Trevor's father, Michael Deely, described the last time he saw his son. Trevor was excited to tell him all about his trip to Alaska, but because Michael was in a rush at that time and had to leave, he told his son to tell him all about the trip at Christmas. But sadly, Trevor went missing before Christmas, so Michael just broke down when he shared this story. Before we talk about the circumstances of Trevor's disappearance, we should address his trip to Alaska, as there has been speculation that it might be connected to why he went missing. Like I mentioned earlier, one of Trevor's main reasons for traveling there was because he had met a girl from Anchorage who was visiting Ireland and wanted to go see her. While the details are vague, indications seem to be that this girl had previously told Trevor during an email that she was going to be very busy during his trip and tried to dissuade him from visiting her, and she gave him a rather chilly reception when he showed up. Normally, there shouldn't be any reason to suspect the Alaska trip was connected to Trevor's disappearance, but it was hard to overlook the fact that he happened to go missing within 2 days of returning home. I know they explored the possibility that Trevor might have disappeared voluntarily because he wanted to go back to the US or something, but the Garda were able to confirm that Trevor never entered the US, and it's unlikely that he traveled anywhere, as his passport was found inside his apartment, and his bank account has not been touched since the night he went missing. Investigators did actually travel to Alaska to interview the girl Trevor saw, but it doesn't sound like she had any relevant information. It's also been theorized that perhaps Trevor became depressed over the fact that his encounter with this girl hadn't gone as well as he had hoped, and he decided to commit suicide upon returning home. Sure, his body was never found, but what if he really did jump into the water that night, and his body was just missed during the searches? Well, it sounds like the suicide theory has pretty much been dismissed. Like I mentioned earlier, the last time Trevor saw his father, he told him how marvelous the trip to Alaska was, and showed no visible signs of being depressed. Yes, it's true that suicidal people sometimes disguise their pain so that everyone is taken by complete surprise when they take their own life. But if Trevor was planning to commit suicide, it seems awfully strange that he would take an extra trip back to his workplace in order to grab an umbrella. I don't think a person who was planning to jump into a body of water and drown themselves would be all that concerned about getting wet from the rain. And minutes before he disappeared, Trevor also left a quick voicemail for his friend, letting him know that they should get together that weekend, so there really were no warning signs that Trevor was feeling suicidal, and his family have openly stated that they believe the entire Alaska trip was nothing more than a red herring in this case. So now let's explore the possibility that Trevor's death was an accident, and that he might have fallen into the Grand Canal, the River Dodder, or some other body of water on his ride home, and his body has just never been recovered. He was a bit drunk at the time, though not so intoxicated that he was incapable of walking home. One theory is that since Trevor was carrying a large umbrella, a strong gust of wind could have propelled him off the bridge into the water. While the Garda seem pretty convinced that Trevor did not drown, though that doesn't necessarily mean they couldn't have missed his body. But another issue is that Trevor's umbrella was never recovered either. Since it was pretty large, you'd think it would have turned up eventually, though I guess a possible explanation is that an umbrella could have been found during the security sweep to prepare for President Clinton's visit, and since Trevor had not been reported missing yet, they did not realize the umbrella's significance and discarded it. Now, I have to wonder about the significance of Trevor's sister Michelle calling his cell phone multiple times after he was missing. While Michelle can't recall this with 100% certainty, she seems to remember that Trevor's phone did ring over the course of the weekend and did not go straight to voicemail until Monday the 11th. On the surface, this would seem to indicate that the phone was functional until then, and rule out the possibility that Trevor had fallen into some water. During an article about the case in the Irish Times, one communications specialist stated that a mobile phone which operated in the year 2000 would certainly have gone dead if this happened. In his own words, quote, "If the phone was on when it went in the water, it would be dead in seconds. The radio signals would not penetrate more than a few inches of water, so it couldn't ring," end quote. However, let's flash back to the episode I released a few months ago about the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. As you'll recall, in that particular case, Brandon was last heard from when a cell phone conversation he was having with his father abruptly cut off, so it's been theorized that he might have fallen or dropped his cell phone into a river. Now, during the next few days, Brandon's phone did ring when anyone tried to call him, which seemed to go against the idea of it being dropped into water. But one of the rescue team members spoke to someone at a telephone company who stated that even if you were to hear the sound of a phone ringing at the other end during an attempted call, that doesn't necessarily mean the phone is still functional, as the ring is actually an artificial sound generated at a switch in some building, not the phone itself. Of course, I'm not sure this would apply to Trevor's case, since Brandon disappeared in 2008, and it's reasonable to assume that Trevor would have been carrying a much different model of phone in 2000. It's worth noting that the Deely family was never too happy that the Garda did not attempt to do more to locate or pinpoint Trevor's phone through its network, but whatever happened to his phone, I think I'm confident in believing that Trevor did not die in an accidental drowning. Another theory which has been pushed forward is that Trevor was the victim of a hit-and-run accident, and whoever was responsible drove his body away from the scene and disposed of it somewhere. That's certainly not implausible, as the lousy weather conditions that night could have provided poor visibility, and because of the taxi strike, some motorists who otherwise would have been too intoxicated to drive might have been on the road that night, so it's easy to see how an accident like that could happen. Some people have ruled out the hit-and-run theory because no physical evidence was found in the area to support it, such as debris from a vehicle. But remember, it was a rainy night, Trevor was not reported missing for 3 days, and the entire area was swept over in preparation for President Clinton's visit. If there was evidence of a hit-and-run accident, it could have easily been disposed of without anyone knowing it. So I wouldn't completely rule out the idea of a hit-and-run. I think the biggest issue with this case is that while we can pinpoint the last sighting of Trevor on the CCTV footage, we can't pinpoint an exact time he disappeared. Since he was not actually reported missing until Monday, theoretically, Trevor could have made it safely back to his apartment, and something could have happened to him on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, which caused him to disappear. Now, you might assume that Trevor would have shown up on some other CCTV footage somewhere before he reached his apartment, but here's the thing. The footage of him at the ATM was originally acquired by some of Trevor's friends, not the Garda. The Garda were not happy about this because they felt it was their job, but this footage was almost lost because it was standard policy for that particular bank to wipe all their footage after 28 days had passed, so Trevor's friends acquired it in the nick of time. So I can't help but wonder if Trevor might have shown up on some other CCTV footage from the area, which was erased before anyone had a chance to see it. But I'm inclined to think Trevor never made it home. Even though he had been out drinking, Trevor was known for being a very reliable employee who would have shown up for work as scheduled on Friday morning, and if he didn't, he at least would have called to let them know. Something probably happened to Trevor shortly after he passed the ATM, and this is where the mysterious man in black enters the equation. Now, we still have no idea if this person has any involvement in Trevor's disappearance, but it's easy to see why one would be inclined to be suspicious of this guy. For starters, the CCTV footage showed him hanging around the rear gate of the BIAM headquarters in the exact same spot next to a pillar for half an hour before Trevor showed up. I have no idea what would compel someone to stand around that long in miserable rainy weather without shelter at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't be 100% certain, but I'm assuming that Trevor might have been the first person to pass this guy during that entire half-hour period, because he immediately followed him and conversed with Trevor outside the other rear gate. If he was a homeless person, this could have been as simple as him asking Trevor for some money or a smoke or something. I doubt the conversation was anything memorable, since Trevor didn't feel the need to mention it when he spoke with Carl Pender a few minutes later. After waiting at that location for half an hour, you'd almost think the man in black was waiting for an opportunity to enter BIAM headquarters, but when Trevor unlocked the gate and walked inside, the guy didn't do anything. It also seems unlikely that he was specifically waiting there for Trevor, because there's no way he could have anticipated that Trevor would decide to walk from the nightclub to his workplace at that time of night. So regardless of whether the man in black is connected to Trevor's disappearance or not, his presence outside BIAM headquarters is a bit of a mystery in itself. I also think this is a good opportunity to clear up a misconception. If you search on YouTube, you will find footage of two other men besides the man in black who show up in the CCTV footage by the rear gate at 3:37 a.m. It turns out those two men in the footage were co-workers who worked at BIAM headquarters, and they were identified and questioned by investigators who concluded that they had no useful information to offer. Well, a few years ago, this case was profiled on an episode of the British true crime TV series Donald McIntyre Unsolved, which is hosted by an investigative journalist. Some confusion ensued because when the episode presented CCTV footage of what was supposed to be Trevor standing outside the gate with the man in black, they mistakenly showed the footage of Trevor's co-workers standing there at 3:37 a.m. So of course people started wondering, who are these other guys standing outside the gate? Until the guard clarified that they were BIAM employees and had no involvement in Trevor's disappearance. I find it odd that there isn't more information out there about these two co-workers. Since they stood right next to the mysterious man in black, you'd hope they might have been able to provide investigators with a more detailed description of them, but apparently not. But the main reason I mention these two guys is because I wonder if their appearance is what prompted the man in black to finally walk away, as he's no longer present when Trevor leaves the building. So the big question is, was the man in black the same man who appeared in the CCTV footage at 4:14 right after Trevor was last seen? Or was that an entirely different person altogether? I guess you could surmise that after he disappeared from the CCTV footage outside BIAM headquarters, the man in black stayed out of camera range to watch the gate, and when he saw Trevor leave, he decided to follow him across Bagot Street Bridge to Haddington Road. If the guy had set his sights on Trevor, that's certainly possible, but there's also no way he could have known that Trevor was going to leave the building less than half an hour later. For all he knew, Trevor could have remained there for hours. And Haddington Road is a 10-minute walk away, so if this guy did something to Trevor, he still followed him for quite a while before he made his move. And that's a big issue I have. If Trevor was attacked, you'd think it would have to be by someone with access to a vehicle. No trace of Trevor was found during the president's security sweep of the area, so whoever did him harm probably had to abduct him from the area, and I think it's safe to assume that the man in black did not have access to a vehicle. He was standing around outside in the rain for half an hour, and if he had a vehicle parked nearby, I don't know why he would follow Trevor on foot for over 10 minutes. The only indication that the man outside BIAM headquarters and the man seen near the ATM might be the same person is the fact that they were both dressed in black, so it's possible the man at the ATM was nothing more than just a bystander passing through the area who had no involvement with what happened to Trevor. I know they've put out public pleas for this person to come forward, and it's never happened, but if he's completely innocent, then maybe he legitimately has no idea that the authorities are looking for him, and that he happened to pop up in CCTV footage which was connected to a missing persons investigation. Now, if Trevor was a victim of foul play, there are many potential scenarios for what could have happened. He was walking around in public after 4 a.m., so he simply could have been the random victim of a robbery gone wrong. But then it was established that Trevor's body was nowhere to be found in the vicinity, and I'm not sure a random mugger who crossed paths with Trevor and killed him would go to the trouble of taking his body out of the area to dispose of it. So the two most likely options are A. Trevor was murdered at a location far away from where he was last seen, which was not swept over by the president's security team, or B. He was abducted by someone in a vehicle and taken to another location. Well, last year, it started looking like the answer was B, since an informant came forward to say that Trevor was abducted at gunpoint, placed inside a car trunk, driven to a house, accidentally shot to death, and then buried in a wooded area. There was good reason to think that this informant might be credible, since he claimed he did not want any of the reward money which was offered. I was following the news about the excavation at Chapel Lizard several months ago, and it was disappointing to see that it came up empty, so now it looks like the Garda no longer think this story is true. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean the informant was lying. He claimed he was passing along information which had been shared with him by a career criminal, so it's possible that he was the one who was lying. But let's suppose there is some truth to the story. I don't know what circumstances could have led to Trevor being placed into the trunk of a car and abducted from the area. Like I said earlier, this could have been a robbery gone wrong, or since the alleged suspect was known to be heavily involved in the drug trade, maybe Trevor wound up stumbling across something he shouldn't have, such as a drug deal in progress or something worse. I mean, this was after 4 o'clock in the morning in the same area where a sex worker had been murdered over a drug debt a year and a half earlier, so I can believe that Trevor might have wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time. If the informant is telling the truth, then there might not have been any intention of killing Trevor, and he was only abducted in an attempt to frighten him into staying silent about what he saw. But the suspect's gun went off accidentally, and now that Trevor was dead, they had to cover up their crime. Given that the authorities happened to stumble across a handgun and a cache of drugs during their excavation of the wooded area in Chapel Lizard, I can totally believe that's a location where criminals would hide things, including a body. While no trace of Trevor was found, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that someone could have gotten paranoid, dug up his remains, and moved them elsewhere in the 16.5 years since the crime took place. So overall, this is a tough one. Since the suspect can't be publicly named, we really don't know enough about him to determine the plausibility of him being responsible, and we don't have any information about the informant to determine how credible he is either. Frustratingly, after such a potentially major development, it looks like the investigation is back to square one. So what do I think is the most plausible explanation for what happened to Trevor? Well, I definitely don't think it was suicide, and I have my doubts that he died accidentally by falling into a body of water. I lean towards the mysterious man in black being a red herring who had no involvement in Trevor's disappearance, and I can't even be sure that the man from the ATM CCTV footage is the same person or that he had any involvement with what happened either. But I do think the most likely theory is that Trevor was a victim of foul play. I'm not entirely sure that the story told by the informant is true, but if it's not, I think the real truth might be something fairly similar. Trevor just crossed paths with the wrong person on his walk home who did him harm. They either abducted and murdered him at another location, or they killed him on the street, but smuggled his body out of the area and disposed of it elsewhere. That's why I don't completely rule out the hit-and-run theory, as Trevor could have simply been hit by a drunk driver, or someone who transported his body out of the area to cover their tracks. But unfortunately, if someone out there is directly responsible for Trevor's death, then they've essentially gotten away with the perfect crime thus far, which is pretty incredible, given how much exposure this case has received in Ireland. At the very least, however, the Deely family have been amazing advocates for Trevor, and you know that they will not give up until they find out what happened. Trevor's parents are both in their 70s right now, and it's heartbreaking to read just how much of a toll this ordeal takes on them as they grow older. In particular, wading through the excavation for Trevor's body last year had to be difficult. When you read stories about the parents of missing victims getting up there in age and hoping to find closure before they leave this world, you sincerely hope that can happen. So if you have any information about the unsolved disappearance of Trevor Deely, please contact the appropriate authorities. But if you just have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide my thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. We also have a Facebook discussion group, so if you feel like discussing the podcast or the cases we feature with myself and your fellow listeners, feel free to join and I'll approve your entry into the group. I also wanted to mention again that I will be representing The Trail Went Cold by appearing on Podcast Row at CrimeCon, which is being held at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel in Nashville from May 4th to the 6th. I met some of you folks at CrimeCon last year, and I would love to have the opportunity to meet more of you folks at this year's event. So if you're planning to attend CrimeCon and need to purchase tickets, you can receive a 10% discount by using our podcast special promo code. Just visit crimecon.com and get 10% off by entering the promo code TTWC. That's TTWC. Like I mentioned earlier, we also have a donate button on our website, so if you want to express your appreciation for all the hard work we put into this podcast, we'd be extremely grateful. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.